Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, the eternal child of music, was born into a world already humming with harmony and divine tension. It was a bone-chilling, ink-dark January night in 1756 in the Baroque swirl city of Salzburg, Austria. Frost clung to cathedral domes like lace, and the wind whistled through narrow cobbled alleys as candles flickered behind thick, foggy window panes. Inside one such modest home, tucked beneath the shadow of towering spires and snow-dusted rooftops, something extraordinary stirred, a wail, fragile yet strangely resonant. A cry, yes, but not just of life. Some said it rang like the first note of a long and miraculous symphony. His full name was Johannes Chrysostomus Wolfgangus Theophilus Mozart, an epic title nearly theatrical in length. Luckily for librettists and concertgoers alike, he would be known simply as Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. That night, the Mozart family was unaware of the weight of history settling in their cradle. But his father, Leopold, a devout man with a violinist's ear and a court composer's discipline, sensed something. As he held the child in trembling arms, the baby's eyes flitted open as if already studying the world with quiet rhythm. A tiny hand twitched, not aimlessly, but almost as if tracing invisible notes in the air. Leopold Mozart was no ordinary parent. He was a respected musician, serving as Vice-Kapellmeister to the Prince Archbishop of Salzburg. Known for his precise technique and encyclopedic understanding of music theory, Leopold was both admired and feared within courtly circles. At home, he was a rigorous teacher, a man who believed talent was divine but must be sharpened by constant labor. His household was saturated with sound, violins hanging like drying herbs, harpsichord keys worn smooth, manuscripts inked with meticulous care. To be born a Mozart was, even from the start, to be born into music. Before little Wolfgang could even form his letters, he was reading musical notation. At just 3 years old, he would sit beside his older sister, Maria Anna, affectionately known as Nannerl, and watch her fingers dance across the keys of their family's harpsichord. She was already gifted, a child of grace and control. But Wolfgang didn't just watch, he studied. His gaze was intense, hungry. He began to imitate her hand movements, first with charming clumsiness and then with eerie precision, his tiny fingers mimicking hers like a mirror. Within weeks, he was playing melodies that startled his parents and delighted every visitor. By age 5, he had composed his first small pieces, not mere childlike improvisations, but miniature works of clarity and elegance. By 6, he was dazzling noble courts across Europe, bowing in embroidered waistcoats and charming entire ballrooms with the flick of a hand. He could sight-read, transpose on the fly, and play blindfolded, not for show, but because it amused him. His memory was photographic. He could hear a piece once and replay it flawlessly. He was, to many, less a boy and more a vessel, a miracle in silk stockings. Leopold, ever the strategist, saw destiny unfolding. He organized the first of many grand tours: Vienna, Munich, Paris, London, a parade of palaces, salons, and concert halls. Wolfgang was introduced to royals, composers, and critics alike. In London, he performed for King George III. In Paris, he met Johann Christian Bach, son of Johann Sebastian, who immediately recognized the boy's genius. These meetings weren't casual encounters, they were quiet endorsements from history itself. The boy captivated crowds not just with skill, but with a radiant personality. He was playful, quick-witted, and giggled through rehearsals. He'd curtsy with theatrical flair, then leap into a sonata with spine-tingling precision. Nobles pinched his cheeks and marveled, musicians took notes and shook their heads in disbelief. In drawing rooms lit by candlelight, whispers grew, "This boy isn't just good, he's something we've never seen before." And yet, behind the delicate lace collars and powdered hair was a mind already whirring with curiosity and fire. Mozart didn't just replicate what he heard, he absorbed it, restructured it, reshaped it. He explored the elegance of the French, the structure of the Italians, the density of the Germans, and then he blurred the lines. He internalized every fugue, every minuet, every aria, and somehow turned them inside out, crafting something new. Even as a child, his compositions began to carry an unmistakable voice, one that would one day define a musical era. The pressures, of course, were immense. The weight of expectation pressed on Wolfgang's small shoulders with adult force. Leopold, who both adored and demanded, pushed hard. Days were filled with rehearsals, performances, travels in carriages across frozen landscapes. Meals were often taken in silence between practice sessions, childhood games replaced by audiences of powdered nobility. Yet Wolfgang rarely complained. He seemed to thrive, to bloom under spotlight and scrutiny. Music, for him, was not obligation, it was instinct. It was breath. Still, moments of softness did exist. In quiet inns after long travels, he'd hum unfinished melodies to Nannerl while she braided his hair. In palace gardens, between performances, he'd race birds and pick flowers, composing in his mind even as he laughed. He was a boy, a brilliant, exceptional boy, and no degree of genius could change that completely. His early works were not just impressive, they were revolutionary in seed form. Little sketches of larger ideas. Echoes of operas to come. With each city he visited, he gathered more harmony, more emotion, more understanding of the human experience through music. He wasn't just a performer collecting applause, he was a sponge absorbing the continent's soul. By the time he returned to Salzburg in his teens, he had already become a legend. His name had crossed borders, his music had begun to drift through aristocratic halls and candlelit salons alike. But inside he was restless. He had tasted freedom, attention, the intoxicating possibility of creation. Salzburg, with its stiff court routines and rigid expectations, suddenly felt too small, not in size, but in spirit. Mozart, still barely into adolescence, had begun dreaming of something bigger. Not just notes on a page, but entire worlds. Operas that told truths. Symphonies that stirred revolutions. Music that didn't just entertain, but elevated. And though he would smile, bow, and play what was asked of him, deep inside, the composer, the true Mozart, was already awakening. Mozart's teenage years were a strange blend of brilliance and bondage. Though he had dazzled kings and outperformed seasoned musicians before he lost his baby teeth, Wolfgang was now tethered to the duties of a salaried court musician in his hometown of Salzburg. He had returned a living legend praised across Europe, yet found himself hemmed in by the stiff collars and tighter expectations of court life. He was no longer a miraculous boy performing for royalty. He was an employee, clocking in with his talent and clocking out with restrained applause. The Prince Archbishop of Salzburg, Hieronymus Colloredo, was a stern man with little patience for artistic temperament. He expected discipline, deference, and productivity. Mozart, however, was restless, curious, and incapable of shrinking his spirit to fit a bureaucratic mold. He composed symphonies, serenades, and masses, many of them breathtaking in beauty and sophistication, but the walls of Salzburg, both literal and metaphorical, felt increasingly narrow. The boy who once ran through palace corridors now found himself stifled by protocol, his creativity boxed in by formality. And yet, the music kept flowing. It poured from him like spring from thawed mountains, inevitable, gushing, wild. He composed operas that sparkled with wit and humanity. Sacred music that soared like whispered prayers. Chamber works that danced with inner light. But Mozart longed for more than applause within candlelit chapels. He wanted freedom to create, to choose his patrons, to write music not as a servant but as a sovereign of his own art. It was around this time that his heart, so attuned to harmony, stumbled upon its first great discord. He fell in love with Aloysia Weber, a gifted soprano with whom he often rehearsed. Their relationship was a cocktail of music, infatuation, and impossible timing. She was beautiful, ambitious, and somewhat aloof. He was intense, impatient, and completely besotted. But love, like art, rarely follows clean lines. Their romance fizzled. Aloysia drifted away toward a different life, a different future. Heartbroken, but not broken, Mozart turned his affections elsewhere, specifically to Aloysia's younger sister, Constanze. She was warm, playful, and far less theatrical than her sibling. Their relationship developed quietly, then all at once. It was joyful, sometimes rocky, often unconventional, but deeply human. Where Aloysia had represented fantasy, Constanze became reality, a woman who could laugh with him, challenge him, and survive the whirlwind of his genius. In 1782, defying his father's objections, Mozart married her. It was a bold act of independence, both romantic and symbolic. For once, he chose love on his own terms. But even more significantly, the year before, in 1781, he had made a choice that would define the rest of his life. He left Salzburg for good. After yet another argument with the archbishop in which Mozart was reportedly dismissed, with a kick he packed his things and moved to Vienna. He was done being caged. He would be a freelance composer, a revolutionary concept at the time. It was a leap into the unknown, a break from the security of court wages and aristocratic backing. But Mozart had never followed the safe path. Risk was in his blood. Vienna, the pulsing heart of European music, would now be his battleground and his canvas. The Vienna years were nothing short of explosive. Mozart entered a period of ceaseless, breathtaking productivity. Piano concertos poured from him, elegant, fierce, intricate, each one a dialogue between mind and emotion. His symphonies grew more layered, more philosophical. His operas began to turn heads and stir souls. This was no longer the precocious child impressing nobles with parlor tricks. This was a full-grown artist redefining the art itself. In 1786 came The Marriage of Figaro, a comic opera that shimmered with political tension and humane warmth. Beneath the levity, it challenged social hierarchies and exposed human folly. It was brilliant, daring, and nearly banned. But Vienna could not ignore its charm. A year later came Don Giovanni, darker and more enigmatic, a psychological storm wrapped in a seductive melody. It explored guilt, desire, morality, and damnation and left audiences both stirred and shaken. In 1790 came Così fan tutte, a philosophical dance of infidelity, naivety, and love's illusions. Mozart's operas did not merely entertain, they questioned, they revealed, they provoked. His music laughed, wept, roared. What amazed his contemporaries and baffled scholars still was the purity and precision of his process. While many composers filled pages with crossed-out lines and messy sketches, Mozart often wrote entire orchestral scores directly with minimal corrections. It was as though the music came fully formed, dictated from somewhere beyond him. He would jot down a melody on a napkin between conversations or walk through the streets of Vienna humming intricate passages that others couldn't even transcribe. It was as if he saw the entire structure of a symphony before the ink touched the page, each note aligned, every instrument accounted for. But genius did not grant him immunity from life's less harmonious movements. Despite his growing fame, Mozart's financial life remained precarious. He lived beyond his means, often renting lavish apartments and entertaining generously. He loved fine clothes, billiards, and the occasional gamble. Money slipped through his fingers like water, and creditors were never far behind. Beneath the brilliance lived a man racked with anxiety about income, reputation, security. The aristocrats who adored his music were not always quick to pay for it. As the 1780s drew to a close, dark clouds gathered. Fashion shifted. Political winds changed. Commissions slowed. His popularity dimmed in the court circles that once toasted his name. Mozart, who had once been Europe's golden boy, now found himself walking narrower streets. The city that once embraced him began to turn cold. But still, he composed. He always composed. Then, in the final year of his life, 1791, a strange request arrived. A masked stranger commissioned a requiem mass. He would not say for whom. He paid in advance. The whole encounter felt like theater, eerie, dramatic, perfectly suited to Mozart's temperament. But something about it unnerved him. Already suffering from exhaustion and illness, Mozart became obsessed with the piece. He whispered to friends that he believed he was writing it for himself. And in a way he was. Mozart was only 35 when death came quietly to Vienna and claimed him. It was December 5th, 1791, a winter night heavy with fog and finality. Outside, the city carried on, horses clattered on cobblestones, taverns flickered with warm light, and the chill settled in over rooftops. But in one small room, the air was different. Thinner. Quieter. The music had stopped. By then, Mozart had become a shadow of the vibrant man who had once danced through royal courts. His health had been failing for months. His limbs ached, his skin paled, and his eyes, once bright with mischief and melody, dimmed with exhaustion. He'd been working obsessively on the Requiem Mass, pouring what strength he had left into the piece with urgency, as though the notes themselves could fend off what he knew was coming. He never finished it. What exactly caused his death remains a mystery. Rumors swirled almost immediately. Some whispered of rheumatic fever, others suspected kidney failure, mercury poisoning, or even foul play. Over 100 different theories would arise over the centuries. But the truth, perhaps, is simpler and sadder. The body of a genius finally surrendered after years of relentless output, emotional turmoil, and physical strain. He gave more than he had and paid for it. Mozart died in his modest apartment, surrounded not by fanfare but by quiet. He left behind a grieving wife, 2 small children, and an unfinished requiem that would soon become one of the most hauntingly beautiful compositions in history. His student, Franz Xaver Sussmayr, would complete it using sketches and conversations with the composer, a patchwork finish to a work meant to echo into eternity. And echo it did. Though his death sent ripples through the musical world, it was not accompanied by the grandeur he had deserved. There was no state funeral, no lavish ceremony. He was buried in a common grave in Vienna's St. Mark's Cemetery, a customary practice for the middle class, not a sign of disrespect, though the symbolism stung. The precise location of his remains was lost to time, a bitter irony for a man whose music would achieve immortality. But if his body vanished into obscurity, his legacy surged. In the years that followed, the sheer volume and variety of Mozart's output stunned even his peers. Over 600 compositions, symphonies, concertos, operas, chamber works, sacred music, and each bearing his unmistakable touch, elegance without effort, complexity without clutter, emotion without indulgence. His music was not written for scholars, but for the soul. He did not merely define the classical era, he completed it. And in doing so, opened the door to Romanticism. Beethoven, Schubert, Chopin, they would all carry torches lit by Mozart's flame. His compositions provided the blueprint for expressive structure, emotional range, and melodic purity. He had proved that music could be both refined and passionate, structured and spontaneous. But beyond the technical mastery was the mystery. How did he do it? How could one man, in just 3.5 decades, produce such a staggering body of work across such diverse genres with such consistency and brilliance? It was as if the music came from somewhere else and he simply served as its scribe. His manuscripts, often spotless on the first draft, suggested not struggle but revelation. Where others toiled, he flowed. Where others revised, he sang. And yet, Mozart was never a saint. He was human, deeply so. He could be childish, extravagant, impulsive. He adored bawdy jokes, wore flashy clothes, and lived more lavishly than his income allowed. He gambled, fretted over money, and made poor business choices. His letters to friends and family were filled with toilet humor, quirky drawings, and bursts of affection. He was a walking contradiction, a man of sublime creation and everyday chaos. He quarreled with patrons, ignored financial advice, and often resisted authority, especially when it threatened his creative independence. He was deeply religious, yet irreverent. Joyful, but haunted. As light-hearted as his melodies could be, they often shadowed deeper pain. In his operas, even comic ones, love is betrayed, masks are torn off, and illusions shattered. He saw the full spectrum of the human condition and captured it with astonishing grace. And there was something else, a rare, radiant empathy. Mozart wrote for kings and for commoners, for gods and fools. His music could stir a bishop or soothe a crying child. He composed not to impress, but to connect. His lullabies wrapped babies in soft melodies. His symphonies lifted hearts in grand halls. His operas, layered, ironic, tender, gave voice to servants and counts alike. He gave dignity to sorrow and sparkle to mischief. In every trill, in every rest, there was truth. His final months, though marred by illness and anxiety, were among his most prolific. Alongside the Requiem, he composed the Magic Flute, a whimsical, mystical singspiel that celebrated love, enlightenment, and human folly. It was a tale of trials and transformation, filled with bird-catchers, enchanted instruments, and mysterious priests. But beneath its theatrical charm lay deep symbolism, a spiritual parable wrapped in fairy dust. When the Magic Flute premiered, Mozart was too weak to conduct it himself. But backstage, he beamed with joy as the audience erupted in applause. It was a rare moment of triumph amid decline. The opera was a hit, a reminder that even in his final chapter, he was still breaking new ground, still playing with form and function, still dancing on the edge of genius and play. In those final days, as he lay in bed with trembling fingers and fading breath, Mozart asked to hear the music he had written. Friends gathered and sang passages from the Requiem at his bedside. He tried to join them, conducting weakly with his hands, eyes closed, lips moving silently. The music surrounded him, not as a composition, but as a comfort. His own notes became his farewell. And then, silence. But the silence didn't last. Today, his music is everywhere, in symphony halls, on film scores, inside jewelry boxes, in cartoons, in dreams. It lives in the fingers of pianists, in the breath of flutists, in the hum of a lullaby at bedtime. His spirit lingers in every crescendo and every diminuendo. He is as alive in a child's first piano recital as he is in a world-class performance at the Musikverein. Mozart did not simply write music. He left us a language, one that whispers, laughs, mourns, and soars. A language that transcends time, culture, and even death. A language made not of words, but of feeling. So tonight, as you close your eyes, listen. Somewhere, just beneath the hush of sleep, you might hear him, that eternal child of music, still composing in the stars. Mozart's music did not vanish with his passing. In many ways, it truly began to live. In the decades that followed his death, the world slowly came to understand the enormity of what it had lost. At first, there were whispers among musicians, small revivals, quiet acknowledgments. But like a seed buried deep in winter soil, his genius began to bloom posthumously. The man had vanished, but the music was rising. In Vienna, where he had once struggled for recognition in his final years, scholars began to revisit his scores. They found complexity and grace woven so seamlessly that entire compositions seemed effortless, as though they had always existed, waiting only for him to write them down. His widow, Constanze, who had been left nearly destitute, worked tirelessly to collect, promote, and publish his remaining manuscripts. It was not only an act of preservation but of survival. And through her persistence, the world gained access to operas, concertos, and sacred works that might otherwise have remained hidden in dusty drawers. Mozart's reputation began to shift. The image of the eccentric prodigy, the boy wonder at the harpsichord, gave way to that of a mature composer with astonishing depth. Musicians who had once dismissed him as merely gifted began to speak of him with reverence. Beethoven, himself no stranger to genius, was among them. He is quoted as saying, "Mozart is the greatest composer of all." Even as Beethoven shattered the musical mold in his own right, he never ceased to admire the crystalline perfection of Mozart's compositions, the way they seemed to breathe, to move with a kind of organic inevitability. But Mozart's influence reached far beyond the concert hall. His music, unlike any before or after, seemed to inhabit every realm of human experience. It could be stately, reverent, and divine. Think of his great Mass in C minor or the Requiem. It could also be intimate, playful, and disarmingly human. Consider the cheerful elegance of his divertimenti or the teasing charm of Ein klein Nachtmusik. He wrote for royalty and for revelers, for God and for lovers, for children at play and for mourners by candlelight. His gift was not only technical mastery, but emotional fluency. He understood the heart in all its forms. By the mid-19th century, a Mozart revival was fully underway. Composers, critics, and conductors across Europe worked to reconstruct and perform his full body of work. His operas returned to the stage with growing frequency, and audiences rediscovered the nuanced interplay of voices and ideas within. The Marriage of Figaro, once nearly banned for its subversive themes, was hailed as a masterpiece of musical drama. Don Giovanni was re-examined as a profound psychological study, not just a cautionary tale. Scholars began compiling thematic catalogs of his works, giving them numbers, cockle numbers, so that they could be better preserved and studied. And then came the modern world. With the rise of radio, records, film, and eventually digital streaming, Mozart's music became more than historical. It became omnipresent. His melodies were no longer confined to gilded halls or aristocratic salons. They rang through living rooms, echoed in cinemas, hummed from earbuds and speakers around the world. Filmmakers used his works to underscore love, loss, comedy, and even war. His piano concertos lent grace to tragedy. His operatic arias added levity to complex stories. In 1984, the film Amadeus reignited global fascination with Mozart. Directed by Milos Forman and based on the stage play by Peter Shaffer, It painted a dramatized, fictionalized portrait of the composer's life, told through the jealous eyes of rival composer Antonio Salieri. The film was not historically accurate, Mozart was not a giggling buffoon, and Salieri was not a murderer. But the movie struck a nerve. It captured the absurdity and agony of genius, the human fragility behind celestial music. It brought Mozart's story to millions, inspiring a new generation to explore the real man behind the myth. What made Mozart so timeless? Was it the mathematical balance of his melodies? The way his harmonies resolved with such emotional satisfaction? Was it his uncanny ability to surprise, to turn a phrase upside down and land on his feet? Or was it the deeper sense that his music somehow mirrored life itself, with all its contradictions, joys, sorrows, and unfinished cadences? To this day, musicologists debate his techniques. Neuroscientists study his effect on the brain. Parents play his sonatas to infants in hopes of sparking intelligence, the so-called Mozart effect. But the real power of his music lies not in theory or cognition, but in connection. In the quiet moment when a solo clarinet glides into a delicate string passage, in the swell of a chorus that feels like light breaking through clouds, in the joy of a child banging out his first simple Mozart tune, and the tears of an elderly listener hearing Ave Verum Corpus one last time. Mozart transcended time not because he tried to be eternal, but because he was completely present in every note. He didn't compose for glory or legacy. He composed because he had to, because the music was in him and it demanded to be born. He wrote in crowded inns, in borrowed apartments, in royal antechambers. He composed while sick, while poor, while elated, while heartbroken. He gave us what he had, again and again, until there was nothing left to give. And in return, we remember. Today, statues of Mozart stand in cities across Europe, in Salzburg, of course, but also in Vienna, Prague, Paris. His image graces coins, chocolates, postage stamps. His name adorns schools, orchestras, festivals. But beyond the marble and branding, beyond the myth and marketing, lives the music itself, pure, immediate, alive. No other composer has bridged so many worlds, sacred and secular, royal and rustic, comedic and tragic. No other composer has been as accessible to the novice as to the master. No other composer has made so many people feel deeply, freely, unexpectedly, without ever uttering a word. And so, his presence endures not as an echo, but as a voice. Not in the silence of tombs, but in the resonance of strings. Not in the past, but in the living pulse of today's music, today's wonder. There is something endlessly fascinating about the idea of a child who carries greatness from the very beginning. A soul that arrives in the world already attuned to something larger, deeper, older than itself. Mozart was that child. But what we sometimes forget is that behind the brilliance, behind the impossible feats and perfect scores, was a family, a home, a life shaped by devotion, sacrifice, and the quiet complexities of love. Mozart's relationship with his father, Leopold, was the axis around which much of his early world turned. Leopold was more than a father. He was teacher, manager, mentor, critic, and at times oppressor. From the moment Wolfgang's gifts became clear, Leopold shifted his life's focus to his son's future. He poured his knowledge into him, guided his hands over keys and bows, and charted his every performance like a general planning a campaign. It was love, yes, but love that came with immense expectations. Their bond was deep and complicated. Mozart revered his father. As a child, he idolized him, mimicked him, craved his praise. But as he grew, the need for independence clashed with Leopold's tight grip. The father who had taught him everything became the wall he needed to break through. When Mozart moved to Vienna and married Constanze against Leopold's wishes, it marked a turning point. Letters between them grew colder, more formal. Reconciliation never fully came. When Leopold died in 1787, Mozart mourned, not just the loss, but the distance that had never been bridged. His relationship with his sister, Nannerl, was gentler, though tinged with a different kind of sorrow. In their childhood, they had been inseparable, two musical prodigies playing duets, sharing stages, laughing through lessons. Nannerl was considered nearly as talented as her brother, especially in her early years. But as she approached adulthood, her musical education slowed. Society offered little support for female composers or performers. While Wolfgang toured Europe, Nannerl remained at home, her talent quietly shelved. The two remained close, writing affectionate letters and trading musical jokes. But time and distance frayed their bond. She married late, bore children, and lived a quieter life, her brilliance preserved only in stories and letters. Constanze, Mozart's wife, has often been misunderstood. Some early biographers dismissed her as frivolous or dull. But history has been kinder with hindsight. She was practical, supportive, and emotionally resilient, traits that were vital for surviving a life with Mozart. She managed finances when he could not. She protected his legacy after his death. And despite his artistic mood swings and financial chaos, she stood beside him. Their marriage, though not without strain, was one of laughter, intimacy, and genuine companionship. In letters, he called her his little mouse and teased her endlessly. Their love was not the stuff of operatic tragedy. It was real, imperfect, and enduring. Mozart's children also form part of this quieter narrative. He and Constanze had 6, but only 2 survived infancy: Carl Thomas and Franz Xaver. Neither would become composers of their father's caliber, though Franz tried. Raised in the shadow of a musical giant, they struggled with identity and expectations. They lived long lives, carrying the Mozart name like a badge and a burden. Outside of his family, Mozart formed rich friendships and mentorships, many of them with fellow musicians. Joseph Haydn, the elder statesman of classical form, was one of his most respected admirers. Before God and as an honest man, Haydn once told Leopold, "I tell you that your son is the greatest composer known to me." The two shared warm correspondence, and though their styles were different, Haydn more structured, Mozart more fluid, their mutual influence was profound. Another important friendship was with Emanuel Schikaneder, the librettist and theatrical impresario, who collaborated with Mozart on the Magic Flute. Their relationship was both professional and personal. Schikaneder provided the whimsical, Masonic-inspired story, and Mozart turned it into an opera of joy, mystery, and transformation. It was one of Mozart's final works, and one of his most beloved. And then there were the patrons, a complicated class of allies and obstacles. Mozart's relationship with aristocratic supporters was always tense. He needed them financially but bristled at their control. Some adored him. Others found him too bold, too proud, too unpredictable. His insistence on freelance composition, rather than long-term court employment, was daring, even reckless, in an era where stability came through servitude. But Mozart was not built to serve. He was born to create freely, even if that meant living dangerously close to ruin. He also faced criticism. Not everyone appreciated his style. Some considered his harmonies too dense, his melodies too intricate. Others disliked the emotional swings, the way he could pivot from levity to despair within a single phrase. At times, his genius outpaced the tastes of the time. But he never deluded himself for approval. He wrote what he believed, what he felt, what he heard in the silence before sound. Amid all this, the family tensions, the friendships, the public and private battles, Mozart maintained one constant: his music. It was the through line of his life, the diary he kept in sonatas and symphonies, the mirror that never lied. His style matured over time, growing richer, deeper, but never losing its signature clarity. He wrote fast but not carelessly. Each note was intentional. Each modulation, each cadence, each unexpected twist served a purpose. He had an uncanny gift for understanding the human voice, not just technically but emotionally. In his operas, sopranos soared and basses thundered, but each voice carried character. Each aria was a confession, a confrontation, a moment of truth. He wrote women with agency, humor, complexity. He gave servants songs as rich as those of kings. He blurred social lines with melody, giving everyone a voice, sometimes literally. And beneath the stage lights, beyond the applause, there was always a boy at the keyboard, eyes alight, fingers dancing, chasing the sound only he could hear. That child never truly left. Even in his most mature works, there is a sense of play, of delight, of wonder, as if he never forgot what it felt like to discover a chord for the first time. As if every composition was still a game, a secret, a spark. That is the paradox of Mozart, both ancient and ever young. He was a man shaped by tradition, yet always one step ahead of it. A composer who mastered form and then made it feel like flight. A genius who, despite sorrow, poverty, conflict, and early death, never lost his capacity for joy. He gave the world a language, not just of notes, but of emotion. And he gave it without filter, without hesitation, without regret. To understand the reach of Mozart's legacy, we must go beyond concert halls, gilded frames, and statues. We must walk into living rooms, classrooms, dreams, because that is where he lives now. Not on a pedestal, but in the everyday. His genius isn't frozen in marble. It moves through time like breath, uncontained and constantly rediscovered. Every year, thousands of young musicians encounter Mozart for the first time. Not in dusty archives, but in the margins of sheet music scrawled with fingerings and reminders. A 12-year-old flutist struggles through the Andante of K. 313, her breath wavering but her eyes determined. A boy at his first piano lesson plays the opening bars of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Not knowing its theme inspired Mozart's own playful variations. A high school orchestra prepares the overture to The Marriage of Figaro, rehearsing again and again until the strings sing with precision. These are not just practice exercises, they are initiations. Each student who plays Mozart becomes part of a lineage, a tradition not of reverence alone, but of intimate, living connection. Educators return to Mozart not because he is easy, but because he is essential. His music teaches balance, of emotion and structure, of clarity and complexity. He builds musical logic into every phrase, guiding the listener through arcs of tension and release, expectation and surprise. For young minds learning composition, there is no clearer blueprint. For budding instrumentalists, his works demand dexterity without sacrificing musicality. He is both a challenge and a companion, always one step ahead, but never out of reach. And yet, Mozart's presence extends even further, into places we might not expect. In hospitals, his music is used in therapeutic settings, calming patients before surgery, easing anxiety, helping premature babies regulate heart rhythms. The Mozart effect, while controversial in its early claims, sparked global interest in how music, and his music in particular, might shape brain development, memory, and emotional health. Scientists now study the specific neurological effects of his compositions, noting how the structure of certain pieces seems to engage both hemispheres of the brain, activating complex cognitive responses. Whether or not it raises IQ points, it certainly raises something in us: attention, presence, calm. In films, his music underscores both levity and loss. Ein klein Nacht music becomes shorthand for elegance or irony. The lacrimosa from his Requiem has been used to mark death, transformation, even transcendence. Directors reach for Mozart when they want to say something without dialogue, to evoke grandeur, sadness, or serenity in a single phrase. Even in advertising, his melodies slip through our daily lives. We hear snippets selling perfumes, cars, chocolates. We hum them without realizing. The commercial world, in its pursuit of prestige and emotional resonance, turns again and again to his work because it still works. And then there's technology. Today, Mozart's complete works are available at the tap of a finger. Streaming platforms, digital archives, interactive apps. His legacy has gone global in ways he never could have imagined. You can listen to his symphonies performed on original period instruments or through modern reinterpretations with jazz harmonies. You can follow animated scores on YouTube or remix fragments into electronic soundscapes. His music, born in candlelight and copied by hand, now circulates at the speed of light, accessible in classrooms in Kenya, living rooms in Seoul, headphones in Sao Paulo. In this new frontier, Mozart is not diminished, he is reborn. Not frozen in time, but fluid, versatile, unshackled. His melodies adapt, stretch, remix, and yet retain something unmistakable. No matter the context, his voice sings through. Artists continue to draw from him. Composers quote him, reinterpret him, challenge him. A string quartet weaves his motifs into minimalist textures. A film score echoes his harmonic progressions beneath CGI battles. Pop artists sample him in mashups, layering beats over Baroque architecture. He would have laughed at this, delighted, perhaps, that his music could play dress up without losing its soul. Mozart was, after all, a man of the theater. He understood spectacle, timing, laughter. He would likely be amused and amazed to see his operas reimagined in modern costumes, set in outer space, staged with puppets, danced in drag. But what would thrill him most is that they still speak, that Figaro's wit still draws laughter, that Don Giovanni's demise still chills, that Pamina's aria still brings tears. The truth he captured in these works transcends style. It speaks to something eternal. Cultural institutions, too, carry his torch. The Salzburg Festival, founded in 1920, continues to honor his birthplace with grand performances that attract the world's finest musicians. The Mozarteum University trains the next generation of performers and composers under his shadow. Across Europe and beyond, orchestras bear his name, competitions echo his standards, and conservatories embed his works into their foundations. And yet, perhaps his most enduring legacy isn't institutional or grand. It is personal. It's in the moment a young violinist realizes that a tricky passage finally sings. In the elderly listener who closes her eyes and returns to a memory shaped by his melody. In the parent who hums a minuet while making breakfast. In the casual listener who knows nothing of cockle numbers or harmonic inversions but feels deeply that this music means something. Mozart gave us more than music. He gave us access to something pure, joy without explanation, beauty without pretense, emotion without manipulation. He reminds us that greatness need not be heavy, that complexity can dance, that precision can still feel alive. He left no manifesto, no grand statement about the purpose of art. But his life offers a quiet answer. Create because you must. Share what moves you, and leave the world not with a monument, but with a melody. And so, even now, centuries after his final breath, we play him. We teach him. We sing him. And in doing so, we keep him. To speak of Mozart is to speak not only of music, but of mystery, the mystery of how such profound beauty came from such a short, turbulent life. For centuries, artists, scholars, and scientists alike have attempted to decode him. What made his genius possible? Was it the result of divine intervention and unrepeatable anomaly, or the product of environment and training? These questions persist, but the answers remain elusive, as ephemeral as the final note of a fading symphony. What we do know is this: Mozart was more than just gifted. He was extraordinary not because he could compose, many could, but because he could feel music before it existed, as if he were simply retrieving something the rest of us had not yet heard. He seemed to listen to the world differently, as if the air itself carried harmonic intention. And when he wrote, it was not with hesitation, but with certainty. His manuscripts, so often clean and uncorrected, suggest not deliberation but revelation. He was not building, he was channeling. Some have tried to explain it through science. Brain researchers speculate that Mozart may have had a rare neurological wiring and enhanced working memory, heightened auditory cortex function, and exceptional synesthetic perception. There are stories that he saw sounds in color, tasted harmonies, felt pitches like textures beneath his fingers. If true, his mind was not simply musical, it was multidimensional, absorbing and translating sensory input into symphonic output. Others emphasize nurture, the environment into which he was born. A father who taught him rigorously, who exposed him to Europe's best composers before the age of 10. A childhood spent immersed in instruments, languages, cultures. It's said that by his teenage years, he had traveled more miles than most adults of his time ever would. He absorbed Italian opera, German counterpoint, French dance, and fused them into something wholly his own. His genius, in this view, was not innate but cultivated, an alchemy of exposure and ambition. And yet, even in the most generous explanation, there remains something unexplainable. Because many children are taught well. Many are supported, exposed, disciplined. But very few become Mozart. Very few, even among the greatest, possess that particular fusion of intuition, clarity, and creative velocity. He didn't just understand music, he seemed to be music. And with that came both triumph and tragedy. Because while his mind soared, his body remained earthbound. Mozart was not immune to frustration, insecurity, or pain. He was known to weep over unjust criticism, to rage against the dismissals of the elite, to fall into gloom when audiences failed to understand him. He struggled constantly with money, not just because of extravagance, but because he lived in a time when artists were still servants, expected to please patrons before pursuing passion. He longed for recognition but hated dependence. He wanted stability but refused to conform. That tension defined much of his adult life, the push and pull between freedom and favor, between expression and expectation. And perhaps it's why his music carries such emotional range. Within a single movement, he could oscillate from joy to sorrow, from grace to chaos. He knew contradiction, lived it, and poured it into every note. Even in his lightest works, there are shadows. Listen closely to his symphonies and you'll hear the undercurrent of restlessness. In his operas, characters laugh through tears, sing through crisis, dance along the edge of disaster. He didn't write happy endings, he wrote true ones. Even the magic flute, for all its whimsy, is a meditation on death, enlightenment, and moral transformation. Perhaps this is what makes him so enduring. Mozart does not hide from reality, he illuminates it. His music doesn't offer escapism, it offers recognition. We hear ourselves in his modulations, our doubts, our desires, our contradictions. He understood people, not just their manners or melodies, but their interiority. And that is why his characters, his themes, his harmonies still feel so modern. He was not simply a man of his time, he was ahead of it. And time, as it turns out, has only deepened his resonance. Generations after his death, he continues to inspire not through innovation alone, but through invitation. Mozart invites us to feel deeply, to listen closely, to embrace complexity. He reminds us that beauty is not simplicity, but synthesis, the weaving of disparate threads into something coherent and glowing. He also reminds us of what's possible. That youth is not a limitation. That brilliance can arrive early, burn brightly, and leave an indelible mark. That even short lives can echo for centuries. In modern culture, Mozart is both myth and man. He is the powdered wig and the child prodigy, the trickster and the tragedian, the court jester and the cosmic voice. He is caricatured and canonized, quoted and commercialized. And yet, underneath it all, the films, the festivals, the facts and fictions remains the same truth. He wrote music that still makes us stop, breathe, and feel. And perhaps that is all we need to know. When people speak of Mozart today, it's often with a tone of wonder, as though he were more legend than man, more myth than mortal. His name evokes images of child prodigies, powdered wigs, chandeliers, and candlelit pianos. But beneath the iconography is something more profound, a human being whose life, brief, brilliant, and bruised, continues to mirror our own in surprising ways. His story is not simply about genius, but about humanity. He was not untouched by struggle. In fact, he was defined by it. He fought to be heard, to be respected, to be free. And in doing so, he became something even greater than a musical pioneer. He became a symbol of artistic courage. The courage to create truthfully. The courage to break from tradition. The courage to risk everything for the chance to say something new. In a world that often rewards conformity, Mozart chose rebellion. Not loud, destructive rebellion, but the quieter kind expressed through melody and counterpoint. He obeyed no fixed formulas. He followed the logic of emotion, not the expectations of his employers. Even as he performed within rigid court structures, he smuggled in complexity, contradiction, and commentary. His operas mocked social hierarchies while entertaining those at the top. His sacred music reached toward heaven while remaining rooted in human vulnerability. He composed like someone aware of time running out fast, feverishly, and with a kind of spiritual necessity. And perhaps that's what makes his work so immediate. There's no padding in Mozart's music, no filler. Every note feels like it belongs. Every phrase carries purpose. He understood the power of brevity, how a single suspended chord could hold more meaning than pages of exposition. And in that restraint, he found radiance. But Mozart was not just a vessel of divine sound. He was witty, earthy, and wonderfully alive. His letters, many of which survive, are filled with jokes, riddles, wordplay, and irreverent humor. He adored puns, poked fun at his own fame, and once described a fellow composer as having a talent for silence. He was a man who could write a sacred mass one morning and a bawdy canon the same night. He moved freely between the sacred and profane, never limiting himself to a single voice or persona. He also loved food, dancing, and dressing well. He played billiards, told outrageous stories, and had a soft spot for animals. In one letter, he lovingly describes a pet starling that mimicked his music. He named it Vogel and mourned its death with a poem and a burial. These small details don't dilute his greatness, they amplify it. They remind us that he was not a distant marble bust, but a breathing, laughing, grieving person. He was, in many ways, ahead of his time, not just musically, but philosophically. He believed in merit over nobility, talent over title. His operas give voice to servants who outsmart masters, women who challenge tradition, lovers who seek truth over status. He embedded in his scores the seeds of revolution long before the Bastille fell. And like many visionaries, he was underappreciated by the institutions that surrounded him. Though adored by audiences, he was often dismissed by gatekeepers. He did not die poor because he lacked success. He died poor because he existed between worlds. Too daring for the conservatives. Too refined for the radicals. Too independent for court life. Too courtly for Bohemia. He belonged nowhere, and so he built his own space, a musical world where everyone could enter but no one could fully replicate. His final works, written in the shadows of illness and fading light, carry a depth that feels prophetic. The Requiem, though unfinished, is both terrifying and tender. It does not flinch from death. It meets it, and not with fear, but with clarity. He writes as if to say, I see the end and still I sing. The final movement of his life was not a grand crescendo, but a quiet diminuendo. No grand funeral, no monumental goodbye. Just a few friends, a common grave, and music echoing into the cold Vienna air. And yet, in that simplicity lies something deeply poetic. Mozart never needed spectacle. He was the spectacle. And his presence continues, not as a ghost, but as a guide. Today, musicians still turn to him for balance, beauty, and truth. His scores are studied not only for what they are, but for what they suggest, how form and freedom can coexist, how joy can be serious, how sorrow can shimmer. His influence spans genres and centuries. From Beethoven to Brahms, from film composers to jazz pianists, echoes of Mozart appear in the architecture of sound itself. Listeners, too, carry him. The woman in the cafe listening to his clarinet concerto with headphones on. The child falling asleep to Ein Klein Nacht music. The teenager discovering Lacrimosa and suddenly understanding grief. His music reaches across ages and languages and circumstances. It does not need translation. It needs only ears and a heart. He reminds us that genius is not cold or clinical. It's playful, unpredictable, risky. He reminds us that art can be exquisite without being exclusive. That depth need not mean heaviness. That elegance is not the absence of feeling, but the alignment of feeling with form. He also reminds us to begin, to start even when we don't know where it will lead, to trust the melody before it's complete, to listen closely not just to the world but to ourselves. He didn't wait for permission. He wrote, he played, he dared, and in doing so he left us a light that never dims. As we come to the close of Mozart's story, we are left with something that words alone can scarcely hold: a feeling, a vibration, a resonance. His life may have ended over 2 centuries ago, but his presence lingers not just in concert halls or dusty manuscripts, but in the quieter places. In the silence before music begins. In the breath held between notes. In the soft, invisible space where emotion becomes sound. He is still with us, not because we remember him, but because we continue to feel him. And maybe that's what sets Mozart apart. His genius wasn't about dazzling complexity or intellectual mastery alone. It was about connection. He had a way of reaching into the listener and saying without words, "I know you." Joy, longing, confusion, grief, mischief, all of it is in his music. He gave us ourselves reflected back through the purest form of expression we have. He reminds us that the deepest truths often arrive not in grand pronouncements, but in simple melodies. That a single line of music, clean, unadorned, can say what paragraphs cannot. That beauty, in its highest form, is not complicated. It's clear, direct, honest, and perhaps most importantly, he reminds us to listen. To the world, yes, but also to the world within. To the subtle currents of feeling that stir just beneath our surface. To the melody we each carry, even if we don't always know how to express it. Because Mozart was not merely a creator of music. He was a mirror, a vessel through which the full range of human experience could flow. He gave shape to the invisible, voice to the unspoken, rhythm to the unsaid. He reminds us that we are not alone in what we feel. He reminds us that wonder is still possible. He reminds us that even in a world so noisy, so rushed, so fractured, there is still room for harmony. His life was short, just 35 years. And yet, in that brief span, he created enough to fill centuries. His music has accompanied births and deaths, weddings and wars. It has traveled across oceans, across eras, across generations. It has survived revolutions, repressions, reinventions. It has been sung by choirs in cathedrals, whispered by soloists on candlelit stages, hummed by children falling asleep. And it continues. Every time a young musician plays their first Mozart sonata. Every time an orchestra rises into the opening bars of a symphony. Every time someone, somewhere, hears those familiar notes and closes their eyes, not to escape, but to return to something real, something honest, something whole. Because that is what Mozart offers us even now. Wholeness. A glimpse, however brief, of what it feels like when all the pieces fit. When mind, heart, and sound align. When beauty doesn't need to explain itself, it simply is. And as long as there are people willing to listen, to play, to feel, his music will remain. It is not a relic. It is a living thing. And in that way, Mozart never truly died. He became part of something greater, not only a name in history, but a voice in eternity. A spark that moves from soul to soul, heart to heart, across time and silence and space. So the next time you hear him, whether in a grand concert hall or a passing moment on the radio, pause. Let it in. Let it say what it came to say. Because somewhere, behind the notes, behind the centuries, behind the myth, there is still Wolfgang. Still smiling. Still playing. Still composing in a language we never fully learn, but somehow understand. And in that understanding, we find a kind of peace. Not an end. A continuation.